Greetings of light. This is AGP June 2023. Great to be with everyone again. So many exciting things to talk about. Where should we start? So as you know, this is the Diamond Light series. And we've talked about Diamond Light in the past, but not so much in the recent past. So I want to talk about what is this Diamond Light. Some of you were at the recent online retreat we had, and you'll recall we talked about beyond the physical body, there is the energy body, and beyond that, there is the light body. And just like we have these bodies, so does the universe. The universe has a physical body, an energy body, and a light body. So as you start looking at the finest aspects of creation, which live in the realms of light, there's so many aspects to light. And for us who are specifically interested in accelerated growth, the Diamond Light frequencies is a set of frequencies in these super high planes of light. These frequencies represent qualities that are very useful for us. Qualities like clarity, transparency, beauty, power, strength, creativity. And so when we come to attune ourselves to these Diamond Light frequencies, we're able to receive the light codes which are part of these Diamond Light frequencies. And these codes awaken within us these qualities, which are very, very useful for piercing through the illusion and seeing clearly the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth of our own nature, the nature of creation, and the nature of infinity. So if you think about receiving these, it's your light body that actually receives these codes. And it triggers a reawakening, a recognition. Not only at the light body level, but from there, that trickles down to the energy body, and then the physical body. So essentially our entire manifested reality is brought back into alignment with essence. So that's the significance of diamond light and the diamond light frequencies. What's useful to keep in mind is not so much to try and understand all these things, but really, if it resonates for you, to really open up to that. Because this entire time we have together, you can consider as a diamond light transmission. So no matter what we're doing, what we're talking about, this transmission is on, if you will. At times you will feel it with great intensity. At times it may be barely perceptible. It's perfectly fine in either case. What matters is your wanting to grow, evolve, wake up, and avail of these frequencies. That wanting, that pure intention, is what makes it work. Everything we talk about here is designed and intended to actually thrust you into infinity. But it's not like you don't have a role to play. You have a very important role to play. The words and everything in between the words, you can receive it at many levels in many ways. If you choose to receive it predominantly at the mind level, at the intellectual level, and you start going down the path of, I really need to understand this and hang on to it, then the unstated assumption is that is what's going to get me there. I'm going to understand it, and then I'm going to implement it, and then someday something will happen. And that's a trap. Instead, consider directly making the leap into infinity. Because there does not have to be this big understanding, analysis, cogitation. That's just an old pattern that's going to be getting in the way. you can always set aside some time whenever you have a chunk of time to sit and ponder about things, which is perfectly fine. But here, when we're together, there is an enhanced probability of making a significant shift in consciousness. Might as well take advantage of that. So, if you drop all preconceived ideas, notions, concepts, everything, and not start feeding new ones, then what's left is this kind of space that is available for you to make the leap. So that's the invitation. And of course, it's up to each one of us whether that's what we want or not. But I want to set it up such that those of us who really want that know what are the ways to maximize the chances of that happening. As you know, these sessions, they are not scripted. Whatever seems most interesting, relevant, is what we take a look at. So in fact, what's in your consciousness and what you bring to the table is very significant. Because we're sort of plugged into this switchboard. And we are all contributing to the field of consciousness. We're also receiving from it. And it's a very dynamic network. So it's almost like we're all together in a lucid dream. And there's many possibilities in front of us. And we are based on our own level of consciousness, we project into this dream. And those projections, eventually we consider that as that's what happened, that's reality. It turns into what feels like reality. So right now, consider, what are you projecting into this lucid space? It's almost like, imagine going to a movie theater with a bunch of people, and everybody has their own little mini projector. So up on the screen, we're projecting our own little movies in the same theater. So in a sense, our overarching goal here is to project a movie that's going to wake us up from the movie. So it's kind of unusual movie. A movie whose script and all the activities is such that it's kind of from within the movie trying to wake us up. And it makes a huge difference if you are wanting to stay asleep or you have this strong desire to wake up. Because if you have a strong desire to wake up, you're going to pick up the slightest little clues. And you'll be awake in no time. On the other hand, if you are really wanting to stay asleep, or you're hoping for a good movie, the kind of movie you really like, and that's another way of staying asleep, basically. I want a different movie. Then you are going to unconsciously resist any clues and hints related to awakening. It's almost annoying. You don't want that. So notice that within yourself, without necessarily, judging that. What are you really looking for? And certainly from my point of view, if somebody says, I'm really looking for lots of great movies, that's totally fine. But of course, my focus is for people who are wanting to truly wake up, to really facilitate that in some way. So it's can happen more easily with a lot less fuss. for those of us who really want to wake up, the trick is you need to find that continuous inner clarity. So you're always available. Because there could be a clue any moment. And when you're highly available, you can pick up on that. And this doesn't mean being on the edge or being stressed out or any such thing. It's not a hyper-vigilant state. It's much more of a relaxed but aware. Where things are not being added and things are not being taken away. That's what complicates things. So whatever's flowing through your consciousness, feel the brilliant diamond light illuminating that, flowing through that. The very presence of diamond light takes away a lot of confusion, a lot of noise in the system. And dramatically increases the odds of us seeing truth. We're already in this sort of meditative space. Now we're going to actually do our air practice, and then we'll pick it up on the other side, continue the guided meditation. As usual, I'll set up the timer. You'll hear a bell go off every 5 minutes. So the next 20 minutes will be air practice, and then we'll pick it up again. can see how the air practice brings you into a state of flow. In each one of the techniques, you can notice if you are not in the flow and make subtle adjustments to get into the flow. And this, of course, happens without you having to think about it. You have to be present. And the more you are in the flow, the more it feels easy and effortless. So we're already in a state of profound stillness where there's great potential. There's potential for anything to happen. Notice what's in your heart. We're going to now step into this beautiful setting. A beautiful meadow with the warmth of the sun, trees everywhere. Lots of open space in all directions. And you can see these gently undulating hills, beautiful greens, flowers blooming, butterflies everywhere. Just relax and enjoy this setting. In the distance, you can hear some waterfalls. You can hear some gurgling sounds. And in this beautiful setting, you are a bird. finding yourself as a bird who has just learned to fly. So still hopping a little bit, flapping your wings, short flights, few seconds, and enjoying the feeling of being airborne. That you can actually fly. And more than anything else, I want you to tune into that feeling. How it feels when you can fly. Tremendous sense of joy and exhilaration, excitement. You can fly in any direction. And you can see so many beautiful flowers to fly to. An abundance of things to feast on. Bugs and worms and insects all over the place. There's an abundance of fresh air, food, sunlight, freedom. And it goes forever in all directions. There is nothing to be worried about. So many trees where you can lie down and take a nap. And as you look up, you can see the sun and the beautiful blue sky, few fluffy white clouds. From this great sun, you can feel radiation. You can feel these super high diamond light frequencies pouring down, great abundance. And it just feels so good. To look at the brightness, colors, and you know there's some good stuff in there, in that light. You just have to show up and bask in it. And even though you're this little bird, in your heart, you have everything. You can hop around, you can fly, there's plenty of food, plenty of places to rest, so much beauty to look at. When you're thirsty, you can fly to the waterfalls, the streams, the creeks, clear, tasty water. As you fly more and more, you are getting better at it. You can now fly higher and longer. You can even go fly above the trees. And now you can see the trees stretching out miles and miles. You can even see there's mountains in the distance. You can enjoy now flying from one part of the forest to another part. And flying longer, and as you're flying longer, just enjoying that feeling. Flying through open space. Nothing in the way. As you rise above the trees, it's like as much space as you want to fly. And then lots of light, because there's nothing between you and the source of light. You can enjoy the flying, you can enjoy the light, enjoy the freedom. Feel the joy in the heart. Everything is right there. You can also now make friends with other birds who are even further away. In this paradise, there's no time. Time just goes by. Nobody's keeping track. at some point you're now no longer a tiny little bird. You're a great big bird. Who can now fly really high. Thousands of feet. All the way to the distant mountains. And as you fly that high, you can see so much more. You can see vast expanses, endless. You can see the mountain range. And as you fly over the mountains, the sense of openness and freedom is incomparable. There is even more space. As much space as you can handle in all directions. Filled with beautiful perspectives of the terrain below. And you can feel the power of light even more. Because as you fly higher and higher and longer, there is nothing between you and the source of light. You can get more powerful radiations from the sun. And this cosmic sun includes a range of vibrations. Including the light codes. The light codes from the diamond light frequencies. So the bird now as it flies, what is it feeling? A tremendous sense of expansion, peace, filled with light, and the blessings of light that give it a feeling that nothing is lacking, a feeling of great benevolence, a wanting to be of service, be a blessing to the entire forest, the landscape, the setting, the mountains, and all the creatures. Because there's so much within, so much light, so much fullness of being. Infinite space, infinite light. And a perspective where you can see the totality of what's there. You can take in the totality of what's below you as you're flying and what's above you, the infinity of the sky. Unrestrained, unrestricted, unconstrained, free. Everything you can imagine, you already have that. You can feel the beauty and benevolence of creation. And as you fly, you no longer see yourself as this bird flying through space. The entire space is you. It's like me flying through myself. This light, this space, this being has no edges, boundaries, limits. All of it. All of it is you. Even though you look like a bird flying through the space, you are not just the bird. You are the totality. All of it. The space, the light, the terrain, and even those other creatures that look like other creatures. They too are you. It's all you. You as the totality, and you as a speck within that totality at the same time. Your finite self and your infinite self and everything in between. Where you can no longer tell anything. This is me, this is not me. It's meaningless. It just doesn't make any sense to say me anymore. There just is. It is. I am. That makes a lot more sense. Notice the bird, how it has gone from being a little bird hopping around to this great big bird flying through large expanses of space. The entire journey accomplished with such ease and grace and joy from the beginning. Even as a little bird hopping around, flapping its wings, so much joy to feel that lightness of when you fly. And yet something was happening. There's more to come, more expansion, until this expansion all the way to infinity. So easy, elegant, and you can still fly freely and endlessly. There's so many landscapes. And there comes a time when the big bird now has really become the infinity that it was experiencing at first, flying through, increasingly merging into, and now fully merged into it. And the bird-like form can disappear. It is no longer terribly interesting, relevant. And you as the bird now can release that form back to the infinite nature. And really there's no change because you have already become the infinite. It's only that form now that looks like it went away. But really, it is very much there as the infinite light, the infinite space, and the infinite creation. All of that is the bird. That which used to be the bird, or looked like a bird, that which was you, is now everything. Let us rest now in this state of infinitude. Continuing to enjoy, continuing to feel that endless, depthless peace, pure beingness. The oneness, allness, suchness, isness. And ultimately something that simply cannot be described, spoken of, but we know. We know that. And as that, let us simply rest as that. That unnameable, unspeakable, indescribable. you can continue to stay in that wide open, amazing, light-filled, infinite space. There's no rush to come out of it. We will take a short break. We will take a 4-minute break. You can certainly stretch, have something to drink. We'll come back and we can talk about it. welcome back. I'd like to start by opening it up for anybody who would like to share anything that came up during this meditation. Okay, everybody's still floating in some space. Great. Which is perfectly fine, of course. You want to actually drink that the light, the openness, the space, the expansiveness, that feeling of there is no beginning, no end, no limits, no nothing. So I'm going to now take a look at some of the questions, and maybe I'll respond to the first question and then open it up for discussion. The question is, this was emailed to me. Does it take time to integrate and embody after realization, or does integration happen before realization? All right. So it's an interesting question. So the way I kind of look at it, for an awakening or realization to be really true, there has to be a fair bit of transcendence, integration, embodiment as that has already happened. Otherwise, it's really not a full, complete, or any kind of balanced state. So what happens is, in the case of the way I look at it, if you've developed in a holistic, balanced way, you get to a good place and you're in a stable place where there aren't big gaps. Now, some integration can still happen and some embodiment can still happen post-realization. And that is, some amount of that is inevitable. That's perfectly fine. There's going to be some facets that only are ripe post-realization for integration. But still, a lot of the big stuff is already integrated. Now, there are cases out there where somebody has had a fair bit of transcendence and for whatever reason has emphasized that and not so much paid attention to all aspects of their development. So there may be some pieces that have been considered either irrelevant or have been subconsciously put aside. And these will be lurking around. And, the way I look at it, it's not really a balanced awakening anyway. But no matter what you call it, it doesn't matter. It'll pop up. And there will be a sort of a big, unpleasant event or events when that integration cycle starts. So the person who's very transcendent, they may regard it as, how in the world this is still going on, but it's going to happen. So whether you like it or not, life is actually going to bring up whatever needs to be integrated. So it's just going to be a little bumpy if somebody starts dealing with some of the big things after a lot of transcendence, which if they are considering that, then I'm done. So that's the basics. Now, if you factor in multiple lifetimes, there's a whole lot more that happens. But I don't think we want to get too complicated. In this is mostly what we need to know. The thing that happens with multiple lifetimes is there's essentially the same thing playing out on a much bigger time scale. So there may be entire lifetimes where there's one of these things emphasized, whether it's transcendence or integration or embodiment. And sometimes, especially in the tail end of a long series of births, when somebody's now getting pretty much there, then those final few lifetimes, they may actually, it's interesting, they don't necessarily start their life looking like they're realized or pretty close to realization. They may not even look like that. They may still go through a lot of things. And then at some point in their life, could be whatever, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, then a lot of things have ripened just right. So their realization is much more apparent to them. Actually, it was pretty much there right from the beginning, but they couldn't see it. So there's a lot going on. The beauty is mostly that we don't need to know all this nitty-gritty, what exactly is going on. It actually unfolds and takes into account most of the things that are important. They're already taken into account. But it's useful to have the general framework, I think. So that's kind of the broad picture. And of course, there's more about these kinds of things in my book. I'm just looking at a comment here from Nicole. That was a beautiful meditation. Reminds me that I've heard that some bird song holds special light codes and frequencies from other realms that most humans can't really connect with yet. Do you know if that's true? How much of nature relates to transcendental light? Are there beings on the planet more aware than humans? Yeah, a lot of interesting things. Now, since nature is in some way more transparent, you could say, to higher frequencies in light. It's able to bring that forth more readily. So whether it's a bird or some other aspect of nature, or just the light that you see in the sky, in fact, or the shapes of the clouds, all these, there's an infinity of things in nature. They're all subtly communicating so many things. So there's definitely, you could look at that as they are bringing in light from the higher realms to us. So I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. Are there other beings on the planet more aware than humans? This is interesting because there are certainly these beings, very intelligent beings in the ocean, who are very ancient and very wise. And they have actually gone past this bottleneck that we are stuck with. Humans are stuck with symbolic processing. We've gotten pretty good at it. Language, communication through language and symbols. But we've also gotten bogged down with it. It's almost like we don't know what to do if we can't use language for it, which is unfortunate. So there are, of course, many creatures in nature, but certainly in the ocean, who are much more in tune with communication beyond symbolic representation. So one could say they are actually in some ways wiser. Our IQ test is a very limited way of assessing intelligence. It's actually a very limited kind of intelligence. But true wisdom means a connection and understanding of the totality to the extent that you are in harmony with it and get out of the way. And when you look at wisdom and intelligence in that way, you can see nature. There's many examples in nature where they clearly have the hang of it much better than we do. Now, we don't want to be too hard on ourselves. Okay, we actually have the capability. So that's the beauty. We can, once we understand how we keep getting in our own way, we can just stop it and we'll be right there. So it's pretty cool if you have symbolic communication when you need it, but then at other times you're not sort of bogged down by that. So it's certainly possible, and even I would say probable, that we'll get there. But in the meantime, we can learn a lot from the kind of intelligence and wisdom that is in nature. We really we have a lot to learn from that and try to emulate that. And it's devoid of judgment and analysis type of stuff. It's more isness, beingness. Again, beingness, the best examples of beingness are no doubt nature. So the best teachers really are, for the kind of stuff we're talking about, beingness, light, infinity, it's definitely nature. And you could say life itself. Life itself with a capital L is constantly showing us the way. So we don't have to look too far. comments or questions? I know a lot of folks might be having their own perspectives on this, so I'd love to hear your perspectives, your comments, and if you have questions, you can certainly ask. Everybody's still in the meditation.
How do we know about multiple lives? And I mean, having grown up in a tradition where we talk about rebirth and several lives,
Yeah.
To me, like if you're thinking about experienced and verified, how does that fit in the framework of something like that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Firstly, in terms of specificity, and if you're asking, how do I know about my previous lives? The good news is really we don't need to know. So in fact, the natural setting, right, where we don't remember anything, that's a good setting. Because everything we need to know, we already are aware of in terms of tendencies, proclivities, and the situation we find ourselves in, the whatever's going on. So in a sense, that's the part of the past that's showing up in the present, and that's all we need to know, really. In terms of generally, if you're asking, like, how do I know if there is such a thing as a past life? Is that really true? I would say, I think each one of us has to look at that in our own way. In general, I would say it's not a core thing. I would say you have to get that. You have to understand that, or you have to believe that, or you have to agree on that. Somebody says, yeah, I don't particularly believe in past lives. Okay, fine. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to buy into it. At some point, you may have your own intuition about that. And I think that's the only real sort of proof, if you will. Your own intuition, if it shows you that there's a timeline that goes way back, then that's most compelling, actually. Your own internal system saying that. Otherwise, it's fine to be skeptical. Say, who knows? And certainly there's no simple way to prove it, for sure. If you're sitting around looking for a proof, that may not quite work. There are some interesting stories and actually verified stories, but at the end of the day, that's, you can't.
I've read stories, and actually there's a few books about past lives.
Yeah.
But I think to me the sort of the more lived example is that you suddenly see a kid who has had no exposure to all of this be very sort of evolved and understanding all of this, while at the same spectrum, the same family would have another child with like no interest in or understanding of these topics. So
Right.
there's,
Right. Yeah, there are many things which are suggestive I mean, a little kid at 4 or 5 years old, plays the piano like a virtuoso. And it's like, there's a pretty good chance some of these talents and skills are coming from prior lifetimes. And also memories. There are kids who remember specifics, and there's some documented stuff. So there is stuff out there like that. But I think at the end of the day, each one of us has to kind of see. In some ways, there's also it helps us see there's much more meaning to things in this lifetime. If you see that there is a continuity, you can see it even logically sort of fits in more. But at the end of the day, I feel experiences in higher consciousness is most compelling, where you essentially come out of this timeline. And when you're out of this timeline, you can see, oh, this timeline is just a timeline. It's not a big deal. It goes many years back and forth, and you've had many things happening. So it's just not a big deal. And you kind of actually sense that, feel that, intuit that. And there may be, for some people, at some point, glimpses of your own past life that are vivid, and you just, again, there's no way I could have actually known that and had that vision if I hadn't actually been there. So there's those kinds of things. And then there's people who do past life regressions, and then you can actually go probing, which is not something I necessarily recommend, but there are people who do that, and they come back with very specific things, like I've got this particular condition in my body, and they can go back and say 3 lifetimes back, this is what happened, so I'm feeling that now in my whatever, backache or migraine or whatever it is. So there are these kinds of things. I generally say, do your own analysis and research, and most importantly, higher consciousness. That's where you can find all the answers, right? So hang out in higher consciousness as much as you can, and everything will be revealed. Anybody wants to add to that or have any follow-ups on that? See something on the chat as well. Okay, I see a couple of things here. So first from Siddharth. How can we practice non-symbolic communication in our daily lives? Okay. So firstly, I would say, first, more important thing is to live in a non-symbolic state. Okay. So even when you're not communicating, there's a chatter going on. And most of that chatter involves symbols, like typically involves words and images. So that's where you want to start, actually. Can you hang out in a state which is mostly free from symbolic representation, where you're simply dealing with subtle feelings, knowings? The more you hang out in that state by yourself, the more that world starts you get the hang of it. And you can then see the world differently, actually. You can talk to the moon. You can have these kinds of interactions. You can talk to your little cat or dog. Totally non-symbolic, and they're already they already know it, so they're waiting for you to get there. So you can actually see how it works. It's pretty neat. It's really neat. You can actually communicate that way with animals around you, and so you can play with that. And then of course there's with other human beings too. You can communicate that way. In fact, I think we've lost our way when it comes to interpersonal communication, because we've got, again, so hung up with the words we say. And we've tried to getting better at communication has become being better at, I'm going to just use the right words to tell you just the right thing, and it should sound just right. As if that's the main thing. And we've kind of neglected the vibrational, non-symbolic communication going on with another being, another human being. So we need to really clean up, actually. We got a lot to clean up on the vibrational side. And when we are saying something, the vibrations have to be congruent with that. And this is not just politicians. Unfortunately, it's all of us who are saying something and feeling something different. So, in a way, we've actually all become politicians. And if politicians is too strong, let's just say diplomats. We become diplomats. And so, we need to really clean that up. And a lot of it is the vibration. Am I really speaking vibrationally the same thing that I'm saying with words? So this is a matter of just tuning in to what we're vibrating and feeling as we communicate verbally. And as we start paying attention, it's going to start happening. Everything start lining up. In fact, in higher planes, this is a given that you're going to be vibrationally communicating exactly authentically. And so that's actually the primary thing on higher planes. So you can't be saying one thing and meaning something else. So it's pretty obvious. Here we've got to be a little more careful. So if we just pay attention, I think this was going to happen. That's going to happen. Again, goes back to the more we open ourselves to this world, the more we will incorporate that. So as an example, a good scientist, great scientist like Einstein, even though we look at his scientific papers, whether it's relativity or the photoelectric effect, it's been reduced to symbolic stuff and then, okay, we say, here's the Nobel Prize for that. Actually, the most of the work was on the non-symbolic side. And we don't see that. We don't even acknowledge that particularly. But he was very much aware of that. He was very much aware of that. So he would actually tap into that, get it at that level, and then now you come back and then you're like, okay, how do I turn this into a set of equations? Okay, so you have to take that non-symbolic and its reflection in the symbolic world and turn it into some scientific theory in his particular case. But again, I think that way of being is really what's important. So in fact, I would say higher ages, even man, centuries from now, there's no doubt there's going to be much more higher quality, higher fidelity, non-symbolic communication. All right. Looking at the next thing. By the way, if anybody has any thoughts or comments, just jump in. Don't hesitate to unmute and just jump in. Otherwise, I'm just reading the next question in the chat window.
Suresh?
Yeah, go ahead.
So jumping in, just a quick question. So if we're wanting to communicate more on a vibrational level, non-symbolically, but we notice that our body maybe have issues or pain, and that's reflecting some kind of incoherence or distortion, are we communicating that out? I mean, does that not need to be healed first before we can truly, on a more uplifting, positive level, communicate non-symbolically or vibrationally? Or does that pain that's in our body kind of affect how we're communicating with life, so to speak?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good question. What happens is that the bodily condition and emotional condition, for that matter, they do, of course, affect us, and they can affect the vibration that we are in, even when we're not necessarily communicating. Just sitting there, we see the vibration being affected. But here's the important thing, and here's the good news. The inner, deeper vibrational communication can actually be completely untouched by any amount of physical stuff going on, and even emotional stuff going on, actually. So there is that always that's available, actually, which is very encouraging. So in fact, so you can even, so you don't have to feel that I'm in a certain amount of discomfort, pain, suffering physically. That's going to totally compromise my vibrational communication. No, it can feel that way because we may feel like we need more energy or motivation to communicate purely. But in fact, it's absolutely, thankfully, that is, the core of that is untouched. We just need to kind of adapt to this discomfort, whether it's physical or emotional. So as a couple of just random examples, if somebody is actually transitioning, they're about to leave their body and there's all kinds of stuff going on, which is not unusual, they're about to pass on, they can still communicate vibrationally, loud and clear, to whoever they want to communicate to. Their vibration can still be great. So it doesn't have to, there's this transcendent aspect where we don't have to feel like, oh, too bad, that means I can't. No, it may take a little effort for us to sort of adjust to maintaining our vibration in spite of whatever's going on. So this is the main thing. And so of course, if you're trying to say communicate with nature or whatever, another being, same thing. We can put out a pure, high frequency, high quality message that is that's going to be, bringing a lot of good and a lot of love, a lot of connection, all the good stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That brings a lot of peace of mind, and it makes sense that the purity of our heart and the
Yes.
and the message that wants to be expressed that is pure. And so
Right.
that makes me feel a lot better. Thank you
Yes.
for answering that.
Yeah. And even in nature, you can see that actually. You can see some aspect of nature may be in a distressing state, in a distressed state. And it will communicate that distress, but also there will be a more purer, higher vibration that it's putting out, which is not affected by its own whatever external state is, is compromised. So same kind of thing you can see with nature. So it's really we are way more than our physical forms, and that's the key. So our vibration can actually be also not bogged down by anything going on in the physical level. Okay, looking at another chat message here. I'm going to read this as I'm going along here. And the question basically is, identity is such a sneaky thing. I became aware of some things I used to identify as and actively work to be aware of it and let go. Now new identities are forming either immediately or after a while. This tendency can be seen on a larger scale in the world, with people becoming increasingly obsessed with their gender identity, for example. Why do we have such a need to identify with or as something? How can we let go of this tendency to identify with something? Yep. Yeah, it almost seems like we can't help but identify with this, that, and the other thing. We don't have to read books on how to develop identity. We just find ourselves and feel like, yeah, this is who I am. And now you got to accommodate me, deal with me. This is who I am. And of course, I just think this is who I am. That's not truly who I am. So this is just simply all part of the whole game. We try on different identities and see that it actually doesn't work. It's as simple as that. We fool ourselves that if I had a slightly different identity, that might really work out. Well, that's wisdom, so inevitably, lifetime to lifetime, we are trying on different identities at the very least. But even obviously within a lifetime, we can play the role of so many roles, right? We can be a child in the beginning, then a sibling and parent and friend and so on and so forth. So many roles, and that's just one dimension of identity. There's so many identities we can try on, and we start little by little seeing that it's not working, basically. The trap is we keep thinking what I really need is a variation of this identity, and that's really what's going to work. And of course, we look at celebrities for inspiration when it comes to this. We look at, oh, that celebrity, if that I was like that, I would be really happy, really happy. And that's, of course, just a projection. And of course, we get to try on so many identities, just like clothes. We've tried on so many clothes. We get to try it on, and it's fair enough that that's a process we go through to explore, experiment, and come to our own conclusions. It just takes a while. But the good news is, once we understand what we're really looking for, we can very quickly reduce the possibilities that we're going to explore. So, instead of 100 things on my plate that I wanted to explore at some point in time, it's now suddenly like 5 things. And that's pretty darn good. And now, of course, those 5 things, as I look deeper and deeper, those 2 are going to fall off until there is almost nothing. And of course, why do we do that? Well, that's what we want to do. It's like, we seem to want to do that. We want to play that game. We want to have fun. Even though we ask somebody, they say, I'm not having fun. This is no fun. I'm having a difficult time. But essentially, that's what they want to be trying out. Comments or questions?
So do we actually have to put in effort or look at how to drop identities, or is it not something we need to go towards?
Okay, so does it take effort? Well, it's going to happen anyway. So in that sense, we don't have to put effort. But on the other hand, it's going to be a very slow incremental process. And if we bring awareness and some effort into it, we can certainly cut out a lot of the possibilities that we don't have to go there. So I would say in that sense, effort has its place in pruning these possibilities, making life actually much more crisp, clear, focused, coherent. There's many identities which we can, through consciousness, through light, we can say, yeah, I don't need to go there. So that's the beauty. That requires some concerted effort. So we don't need experiences, basically. Go ahead.
So by effort, do you mean just being aware, like trying to be more aware, or what does that effort look like?
The effort looks like, at a very fundamental level, it is awareness. It is awareness and the willingness to let go. These are like really at the core. Now, layered on that, you might say, well, how do I build awareness? That's when you might say, well, I'm going to do what look like practices. I'm going to have a meditation practice because that's going to develop my awareness. I'm going to hang out with certain kinds of people who are more likely to keep me aware. I'm going to read books, I'm going to watch movies, I'm going to listen to music, which are likely to make me more aware. So now more and more of life, or I'm going to eat in a way that's going to keep me more aware. So now it's turning into really, I don't know if you want to call it effort or not, but living in a way that really shows that you mean business. Right? Effort doesn't have to look like I'm going to climb Mount Everest. It's going to be taking this, really lot of effort. No, but it does take a concerted focus to bring that awareness. Because otherwise, if you just say, yeah, I want to be really aware, 24 hours a day, I just want to be aware. Actually, you find that it's hard to stay aware. You keep going into...
Yeah.
So then that's where some of these understandings, practices, they help us build that capacity to be aware. More and more aware and more continuity in awareness.
Mhm.
That does take some effort.
Okay.
So discipline, practices, books, all these things which motivate us, and essentially we develop the muscles. Sometimes I call it consciousness muscles.
Mhm.
You need these muscles. Otherwise, you can't just say, I'm going to show up one day and pick up, 200 pounds. Well, yeah, it's a nice idea, but you can't really pick it up if you haven't really toned and built your muscles. Kind of like that. Just wanting to have great degree of awareness, you find that it's not necessarily translate into real awareness. It takes all these things over time.
Got it.
Yeah.
That I think made things very clear for me
Okay.
about how all of this ties into that.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. Yeah, and we also realize we are chasing too many rabbits.
Yeah.
I find that literally, this is almost universal, you could say. Even folks who are fairly, deep into spirituality and wanting these types of things, they haven't quite seen how they've complicated their life. They've made it complex, and they're dealing with the complexity. And it's like, okay, just stop making it complex. Okay, that's the simple answer. Like, instead of wrestling, trying to find some very cool solution to some very complex problem, you stop creating the problems. So we see that more clearly over the years. That's the kind of thing which meditation helps. You can start seeing more clearly, and you stop complicating. And one of the ways we complicate, there's many ways we complicate things, but one of the ways is, of course, we start throwing things into our plate. Even if it's that innocuous as, oh, I need to go on vacation I need to go to Alaska. Alaska, definitely. Okay. All right. So now, again, nothing terrible about going to Alaska. It's just a great place to visit. I'm sure I haven't been there. But we have a million such things. So eventually what happens is, and I don't just mean vacations, there's so many things.
Yeah.
We keep throwing it in, not realizing this is actually going to now make it harder and more complex. And eventually we have to take responsibility for that. And we say, okay, I don't need to keep creating problems and trying to solve them. There's something not right with there. I'm going to stop creating problems. That seems a smarter thing to do. And you find that effect very much in your consciousness. You just sit down, you find there's nothing there. Because you've simplified things. There's no 25 things screaming at you for attention. So it's naturally also simplified. And then, of course, there's always things which we can't control. There's no doubt about that. It's not about, everything is going perfectly kind of thing. But a lot of times I find people who year after year, they have, like any given time, they have not one or two, they have 3 crises going on year after year. And when you're, new to such a person, you might feel, oh, right now this, they're going through something pretty difficult phase of their life. But you see them a year later, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, always there's 2-3 crises going on. Now it's like, wait a minute. Something is not right here. That's when you see that they are in a mode where they keep manufacturing crisis in their basement. So there is some part of them which actually likes that going on. Always there's a crisis going on. Because that's what it is the case if it's going on like that for a long time. So to some degree, all of us, that's what's happening. To some degree. We're making it unnecessarily complicated, and then we are dealing with the complication. So part of this answer is to your question is that, as we develop awareness, we also realize, let me simplify my life. The things that I can control, the projects I do take on, the way I deal with people, does it result in a lot of fallout? Every relationship that causes me to spend a lot of time dealing with a mess. These kinds of things. We just start seeing that and we stop doing it eventually. So that's also a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And, ambition is yet another piece of that, right? So we, career, what does it mean? What does it mean to be successful? All these things, we can sometimes go overboard. And that is an endless pursuit. We can turn it into fairly complex. And, I come across so many people, you'll be surprised, who are past their middle age, who are who don't need to be working day and night. They're comfortably off indefinitely, okay? But what do? They work as if they're penniless. They're like working crazy amount of time. They don't know what else to do, actually. So their ambition keeps driving them to do more of this and that. There's no real reason in terms of livelihood or anything. They've already achieved it. They've already made money. But that's not good enough. They keep going. So that's just one class of misplaced ambition. But obviously there's so many different scenarios. I'm just giving that as an example.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's so many aspects, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so identity is obviously at the heart of it. There's a lot of things we do driven by identity. If I start thinking, well, if I'm a good parent, I better do X. Okay, now I'm going to go off and do X. And some of those things are driven by our identity and what we think that means.
Yeah, and I guess it feeds that identity even more, maybe, unless you break the cycle.
Yeah, it can feed that. It goes on and on. Even our social identities, for example. Like, I want to be a good friend, a good neighbor, a good partner, a good brother, a good... there's so many things. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean a lot of things that I gotta say and do. And it's like, okay. It's yet another thing we try to do and we fail. Eventually we say, okay, you know what? It's not quite working. So let me make some reasonable choices. I'm not going to go overboard trying to be a good neighbor. I'm going to be a good neighbor, but I'm not going to go crazy. And so on and so forth. So that we keep our internal focus going, our awareness, our continuity. Now, I don't recommend the extreme version of that, where we say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to take off and get a little cabin in some remote part of Colorado and then just stay there completely disconnected from the rest of humanity. Not necessary. That's not really the answer. we could certainly be in the world, and we can certainly make some choices that allow for this. We don't have to go extreme.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom from everyone here? Because we've all got so many experiences and insights, I'm sure. So I'm looking at the latest couple of comments. So one comment is, it feels like it takes some grace, surrender, humility to drop an identity and not tussle with letting go. Yeah, it is true. I mean, we could use some resources and help to get further clarity. And then, of course, grace is always we need it badly to truly come out of it. So, yes. In fact, wisdom and humility, they go hand in hand, because the wiser we get, the more humble we are. We don't get all bloated about our own opinions about this and that. That's not wisdom. That's just a bunch of opinions. Wisdom comes with, you might have some opinions. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a perspective, but there's a lot of humility and heart. There, when you see humility and heart, oh boy, that person may say something, they may not say anything, but this is a wise being here. That's how I look at it. They're not necessarily pontificating and saying some wise this and that, wise sounding things. Who cares? It's their humility and heart. If that's there, they're pretty far along. They've already seen and let go of a lot. And so a lot of identities, a lot of experiences, a lot of baggage is gone. Next question I'm looking at in the chat is, if we're cooking up things to fix in our life, is that typically coming from a place of lack? I see how awareness is key to seeing this. That's a good point. So it's often the case, even though we don't see it that way. We might say, I'm looking for a great relationship, or a great this or a great that. We feel, wouldn't that be great? And, that sounds great. And nothing wrong with it. But what we often don't see is that there is an identity and a lack out of which that is coming. In fact, it's so common that it's like we almost don't see that. More often than not, we don't see it. And of course, whether that object, whether it's a thing or a person or an experience, when it comes into our life, we then have it's a mixed bag. And then we also see eventually it comes and goes, and we see that, that wasn't like the ultimate fulfilling thing that I could have dreamt of. It just was yet another thing. So we kind of see that it didn't really work. It didn't really fulfill us deeply. And which is pointing at the fact that it came out of something, and maybe there was a better solution. So this awareness is very useful to help us see whatever's coming up within me as desires, wants, Where is that coming from? If I'm just sitting doing nothing, why does it feel like I need something else to feel good? Okay, even if that's as harmless as, I want to put on some music here. Nothing wrong with listening to music or anything, but notice that a little bit. Why do I have to have music to be feeling good? I mean, I could just sit and feel good. So I'm feeling some sort of lack of something, or I'm uncomfortable with something, and I'm thinking music is going to make me feel good. And it does make you feel good, but what we are missed out is there was something there that needs to come into the light of awareness. Okay, and we basically said, nah, not now. Too tired, not today. I don't want to deal with it. Just let's put on some music, or even better, some wine and music. Okay, so it's basically us saying, forget all this awareness business. I'm just, I don't want to go there. So that's what happens in small ways, like in my example is a small way, but in bigger ways too. We can go through a whole big relationship. In that entire relationship, there was some awareness that we chose to not bring forth. We kept certain awareness hidden for some reason. So these kinds of things are happening all the time. So in fact, we can save ourselves a lot of trouble just by sitting and looking at what in the world is going on in our being, and not keep jumping up, getting something from the fridge every 5 minutes, grabbing the remote control every few minutes, listening to music, watching the whatever Instagram feed, etc., etc. These are all making us, again, stay relatively unaware. But if we just sit with the discomfort, of course it's going to feel a little uncomfortable, but if we go there, it's actually well worth it, because something is going to get cleared up. And we've saved ourselves a headache, actually, which would have been shown up as some experience which we had to go through, and it just didn't play out too well. It just didn't have to happen. We just brought it into awareness just sitting around. And that's, if you ask me, that's the power of beingness. If you just keep being, you will find that anything that needs to be transformed will be transformed. And you will have efficiently, with the help of light, very efficiently purified your consciousness and come out on the other side, where you can be in higher consciousness and abide in it, and not keep getting kicked back and forth by life and random experiences, or seemingly random. So that's, great questions. Let's see one more here. After this next question, we're going to jump to some of the on the lighter side things. I think we're almost ready for that here. So next question I see is, does this identity depend on the blueprint or depend on our free will? Okay. Well, so it's not either or, it's both. So the initial conditions of our life, we just find ourselves, right? We just find, oh, here I am, born into this family, in this place, in this time. So that was not like a random thing. So that itself was already a blueprint, but also influenced with our input. So at every stage, you'll see both these pieces. There is a kind of overriding blueprint, which is kind of like a template for our life, but it is not this rigid thing that's like every little thing is all fixed. Now I'm like, there's really nothing I can do. It's a very disempowering state. It's not like that at all. It's a very dynamic state. It's a dynamic set of conditions. So our participation in life in any given moment is constantly shaping how it's going to unfold. And the template is also there. The blueprint is there as a sort of overriding, sort of its overall direction for the life and the things which we really need to get in this lifetime. So it's actually, the blueprint is trying to maximize the chances that you will get some of the key learnings from this life. That you've figured, for this life I need to learn these two things really well. So it's going to try to increase the chances that you will actually learn those two things. It's more like that than some rigid structure. And as I like to point out, we have incredibly powerful choice. We can't constantly ignore this choice. We keep thinking, I need to shape the external circumstances. We forget the most important thing that we can directly control. We don't do that. And what is that? That's our level of consciousness, our level of awareness at any given time. It is never mandated or fixed by any blueprint. It's completely available for us to take as high or as low as we want. And so we for some reason, we just toss that. The most important freedom we have, we just toss it and set it aside. And we say, what I really need is a really good job in this place or whatever we think. So we turn it into circumstances, and I depend on certain circumstances, and I want it to turn out this way. We put all our energies in that, and we let go of the most important thing. The level of consciousness. So I would say reverse that. Focus on keeping your level of consciousness as high as you can take it. Anytime, all the time. Keep it as high as you can. And from that place, firstly, your situation will look different. The problems look different. The opportunities look different. And then you take actions that make sense. Obviously, I'm not saying raise it super high and just take a nap. Take it super high and then take actions that make sense to you. And things will go much more optimally. Way more optimally. So, that's that. A lot of good questions and a lot of big questions. I think we definitely need some perspective from the lighter side. Okay, so here again, I'm gonna unmute folks. So this is a good time to unmute so we can see how you're handling the jokes. So this time, it's not just one-liners. Some of these are short anecdotes. Some of them are one-liners. There's all kinds of stuff. So here we go. And by the way, there's no particular theme. There are like all kinds of things. All right. So the first one is like a little anecdote. I waved to a man because I thought he waved at me. Apparently, he waved to another woman. So, to get out of the awkward situation, I kept my hand up, and a taxi pulled over and drove me to the airport. I'm now in Poland, starting a new life.
That's like how we live our life.
Next thing you know, you're in Poland. Oh boy.
If we're not aware.
Right. A job application asked me to list 3 references. I wrote in Wikipedia, Google, and Oxford Dictionary. I didn't get the job. Two hunters are out in the woods when one of them collapses. He's not breathing and his eyes are glazed. The other guy whips out his cell phone and dials 911. I think my friend is dead, he yells. What can I do? The operator says, calm down. First, let's make sure he's dead. There's a silence, and then a shot is heard.
Oh no.
Back on the phone, he says, okay, now what?
Oh, that's
It's horrible.
Suresh.
That's bad.
That's pretty dark.
Let's go into the dark side. This is not the lighter side.
Yeah. False advertising.
This is the dark side.
It's super funny. That's all
Now
that matters.
we need a light one now.
Don't go hunting with Suresh.
Yeah, right.
That's funny.
Oh boy. A highway patrolman pulled alongside a speeding car on the highway. Looking at the car, he was astounded to see an elderly woman behind the wheel was knitting. The trooper cranked down his window and yelled to the driver, pull over. No, she yelled back, cardigan. I quit my job working for Nike. I just couldn't do it anymore. Anyone want to buy some exercise equipment? I'm having a going out of fitness sale. Next one is from George Carlin. Why do they lock gas station bathrooms? Are they afraid someone will clean them? A guy spots a sign outside a house that reads, "Talking dog for sale." Intrigued, he walks in. So, what have you done with your life? He asks the dog. I've led a very full life, says the dog. I lived in the Alps, rescuing avalanche victims. Then I served my country in Iraq. And now I spend my days reading to the residents of a retirement home. The guy is flabbergasted. He asks the dog's owner, why on earth would you want to get rid of an incredible dog like that? The owner says, because he's a liar. He never did any of that. The problem with Netflix recommendations is that they assume I like the show just because I watched 13 hours of it. All right, and so this last one, I think it's gonna. You might have some thoughts about this one. It's interesting. Certainly, it has something for us. All right, so a crow was sitting on a tree, doing nothing all day. A small rabbit saw the crow and asked him, "Can I also sit like you and do nothing all day long?" The crow answered, "Sure, why not?" So, the rabbit sat on the ground below the crow and rested. All of a sudden, a fox appeared, jumped on the rabbit and ate it. Moral of the story: to be sitting and doing nothing, you must be sitting very, very high up. Okay.
So just be.
So think about that, It has a
Good point.
subtle point there. You guys are sitting very, very high up. What does that really mean, right? You can't just be a lazy guy just sitting around and just saying, oh, I'm doing a very advanced meditation from this book, just be. Just a lazy slob. You got to be sitting very high up, meaning you got to be in a higher state of consciousness. Otherwise, you're just sitting around doing nothing.
You're going to get eaten by a fox.
A fox will take care of you.
Is what's going to happen. Or killed by a hunter.
Yeah.
Kind of really.
One of those two things.
Yes. So I thought that was a really interesting one for us, especially as we
Yeah, I
talk
like that
about
one.
being. There may be other interpretations, which I'm open to. That's just my take on it. Okay, so those are the sort of on the lighter side. I think you guys may not agree with that. So kind of on the lighter side. Okay. So what now? What do you guys want to reflect on, talk about? Could be anything from birds to foxes to rabbits, anything. I'm gonna just mute everyone just to reduce background noise. So when you talk, feel make sure you unmute yourself. So I'm now muting everyone. Okay, so the question I'm looking at in the chat window. Can you speak to the need for people, the mind, to have evidence versus belief? Well, we are certainly educated to be, we're told, well, it's got to be evidence-based. What's the proof? What's the data? Where's the scientific analysis? Where's the logic? Where's the proof? And otherwise, it's just like, it could be anything. And obviously that has its place. There's ordinary logic and looking for evidence to support that logic. Unfortunately, when we take that, it's kind of like a hammer. It's like I went to school and they taught me how to use a hammer. And now I can't carry a hammer, on my belt. And now everything through life, I'm thinking, I'm going to pull out this hammer and use it. And that hammer is like this kind of way of thinking, which we think is scientific. Actually, it's kind of primitive science, but never mind. That's what we think is science and logic and so on. And we keep working with that. So naturally, when we start running into things which seem to be, you could call it supernatural, paranormal, beyond ordinary logic and senses, we don't know what the heck to do with this kind of stuff. And this includes even when we start getting into spirituality. There's a lot of things, interesting things that are actually in the non-physical. So if you start thinking, well, gravity applies to everything, and if there's something non-physical, well, it better follow the laws of gravity. I mean, we are really applying the wrong tool. Gravity applies only when there's mass. And it comes with certain things which we don't realize. Similarly, our kind of crude logic and evidence-based way of looking at things, we are coming from a limited way of looking at things. And so when we deal with higher consciousness, if we insist on that same way of looking at it and think, well, unless I see the proof, I'm sorry, I can't believe all this stuff, then essentially we're saying, I don't want to go there, I can't go there. And it's because it seems like for that person it feels like just blind belief. It's like you're just asking me to believe something, I can't see it, I'm not able to put it in a test tube. So I don't know if it's true. So that's unfortunately quite prevalent, right? That perspective is quite prevalent. And science is currently as they call it, scientists are the high priests of today's world. If the scientists say XYZ is true, then the rest of us will be like, okay, it must be true. Because this Nobel Prize winning scientist said whatever they said, so it's true. That's what we're ready to believe. Now, I think for folks who really want to go further and further into higher dimensions, we've got to get off of that way of thinking. And it's not like it's either evidence-based or otherwise it's blind faith. Actually, there's other options there. The evidence may look very different than the evidence we are used to. And there's other ways of knowing things which kick in, which come online when you deal with the non-physical realities. And so that eventually is itself evidence. If you are, attuned to non-physical perception, then there is evidence. But now you are able to pick up that evidence. But if you keep insisting that it's got to be, it's got to work in a way that I'm used to looking at things, and you're not willing to change, well, it's hard to convince such people. They have to go through their own process. And I think people who have been at it for a while, you can see the change over the decades where they soften from a very sort of position where they're very like, well, I got to see it to believe it, to there's many ways to see it actually. Seeing, what does seeing really mean? So when you have more and more direct contact with higher dimensions, you start seeing things differently, and you realize some of these things, that's how they are. You have to find, your instruments have to be, you need more than a hammer. Hammer is not going to work. And so for ourselves, we have to develop these capacities. And we see more and more. For other people, they have to be open and they have to go through their own process to get there. So we just have to be patient with them, let them be as they are, where they are. And that could be a lot of people. You can see for some people how that happens when they have some dramatic experience, like a near-death experience. Somebody who's completely like not into these things, they have a near-death experience and suddenly night and day. They can suddenly like, oh, I talk to angels and, I talk to my husband who passed away and all kinds of things start happening. So they are now in a different reality, a different understanding of the universe. But of course, most folks are still they think very scientific actually. And true science, if you ask me, is not about thinking today's science is the ultimate science. If you look at science, truly science should be open to all kinds of things. It shouldn't insist that our understanding of the science today is it. It should always be looking at it as there's a lot we don't understand. I think that's the mark of a good scientist, who's actually, he or she is humble because they know they don't know a lot, as opposed to being arrogant with the two things they know. That's a scientist and a science that is very small and closed. True science is very open and realizes that there's a lot more. Other thoughts on that? Other thoughts or questions? So I'm looking at the follow-up to that. Does it have to do some with the closing off of their hearts? Yeah, it's a combination of things. Closed heart, closed minds. And sometimes the mind is afraid to open because it feels vulnerable. And that goes back to the heart. And they don't want to feel weak and vulnerable. So sometimes that openness is internally translated to weakness and vulnerability, which means, that person is going to say, doesn't make me feel good. So I would rather stay closed, and I feel pretty good. I feel strong. I feel in control. I feel I'm in power. Actually, it's not real power or any such thing, but they feel mistakenly like that. So it keeps going for a while until something happens. So yeah, certainly the heart mind is this connection there. And there's also an energetic thing going on, right? There's energetically something maybe causing them difficulty. It's like I've said before, there's as we go through various experiences, we keep adapting, and sometimes those adaptations are too rigid and strong. So in a particular situation, we adapted a certain way, and then we got kind of stuck with that adaptation. And then 2 years go by, and that adaptation is now too restrictive, but we still stay with it instead of now adapting further to the new conditions. So, like I say, the adaptation of yesterday is a maladaptation of today. We have to keep constantly shifting and adapting. If you get stuck and attached to the previous adaptation, which is very common actually, especially when there was some kind of strong an event that has got a lot of juice and a lot of that stuff happening, then, we feel like that's it. That was so terrible. Whatever adaptation came out of that, I'm not going to leave that for the rest of my life. So now we're kind of stuck with that. So all these are very common, unfortunately. So something I wanted to touch on, and this is, again, it has come up in the past, but again, it keeps coming up, which is a fascinating topic, which is lucid dreams. And time to time, as all, those of you who've been with AGP for a while, or even TYL, we've talked about lucid dreams on and off many times. And for some people, there's always some people for whom it's new. And I would say, for now, take a look at that. It's one other interesting way of growing in a way that's sort of available every night. And it's very different than meditation. It's a different kind of skill to become lucid. And of course, if you've never heard of lucid dreams, it's the idea that in the dream state, you have the awareness that you're in the midst of a dream. So essentially you're awake to some degree. In other words, you're lucid. That's what's happening is a dream, at least to some extent. So that lucid dream state has a lot to offer, actually, because it gives us the ability to develop awarenesses in yet another interesting way. And it's like, why not take advantage of that? And you can do some pretty cool things too in the lucid dream. So the more you're aware, the more you can sort of shape the dream. And that's already pretty lucid if you can shape the dream as it's unfolding. And I like to tell people, here's a few cool things you can do. And this is simply to get your attention in terms of the neat things that lucid dreams offer. For example, you can, let's say you're dealing with some condition, some health condition, right? You can actually, in your lucid dream, you can imagine this, some super high plane of consciousness where there's this pristine pool of healing vibrations, right? You can step into this pool and all these healing vibrations are permeating your entire being, all levels of your being, including your physical, and healing whatever the condition that is a concern. Okay, you could do this in your lucid dream, and it's not just a dream. It's actually, this healing is going to have profound effects, which will also show up on the physical. So that's one example. For example, it's a healing opportunity. Very different kind of healing opportunity. Or imagine some very great being, maybe an ascended master, or maybe some super high being of light. You can think of them, connect with them, you can interact with them, and most of all, you can just sit with them and feel the transmission of light and vibration from them. That's going to have a profound effect on you. I mean, that's kind of super cool. These kinds of possibilities. And again, the more lucid you are, the less it's just another dream. It's actually, there's more than just a dream going on. So you can do the things like that. You can, if you've got persistent fears, maybe you're claustrophobic or whatever fears you're dealing with. In the lucid dream state, these fears are much more fluid and available to release. So when you're lucid, you can say, my fear of closed small spaces, I'm releasing that into the light. Okay. And boom, you release it. It is a very powerful release because of the fluid sort of state you're in the lucid dream. So there's access to the subconscious in a different way. Because when we're conscious, we kind of lock it out. We keep the subconscious like locked up in some basement or someplace like that. But in the lucid dream state, it's all everything is right there. So you can do things like that. I mean, these are obviously incredibly useful for your growth. And if you've, one of the things you could do is, of course, the state of pure beingness. You can step into that state, pure, pristine beingness, and just stay in there indefinitely. Right? You can sit in that pure beingness for 100 years in your lucid dream. Right? 100 years can go by in 2 hours. And wow, that's pretty darn good. Because time itself is also very fluid in these states. As you already know, with dreams, you can have 5 years go by in 10 minutes. So these are neat possibilities which I'm simply mentioning so that A, people who are already looking at lucid dreams can experiment with these. And B, if you have never looked at lucid dreams, take a look. We don't have the time to get into all the how to actually induce a lucid dream and so on. But we've talked about it in the past, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the future. And speaking of the future, of course, actually, in this 6-month sequence, this is the last of the 6-month sequence. So next month we start a new AGP 6-month sequence. So it doesn't automatically carry over. So you have to sign up for that. It's on my website. You can go sign up for that if you want to continue. As you can tell, this is not like you take it for 6 months and you're done. You're graduated. It's a continuing thing. So if you feel it's useful, it's supportive, if it's the kind of thing you feel would help you in your journey, then I invite you to sign up and continue. Several folks continue like that, but it's up to each one of us. So the next one will be the July AGP, which will be the first in the next sequence, will be on July 24th, which is a Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific, same time. So July 24th. And so you can note that down. Also, the Just Be study group. Again, if you haven't checked it out, you want to check that out. The next one's going to be on Saturday, July 8th. And I believe that's 9 a.m. Pacific. So that's another good resource, which is, by the way, it's independent of AGP. You can always do the study group. It's totally free. There's good discussions there. And so I would encourage you to check that out. You can contact me or Cindy to be notified of those meetings. Those are some of the announcements. Yeah, I noticed one of the chat messages I missed. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Einstein, indeed. Indeed. Yeah. Yeah, he was very conscious of these things, which is great. Heart-based person was also intelligence and also tapping into higher states. So that's pretty impressive, Einstein. Okay. As we start wrapping up, any comments or questions as we bring things to a close? A lot of these tools and techniques we talk about, keep in mind, you can use this anytime. So anything that you remember from a guided meditation or anything we discussed, these are resources you could tap into at any point. So keep that in mind. Including the funny one-liners. They're a great resource. Okay. So yet again, any thoughts in closing as we wrap up for today? Okay, great. So, yeah, as you've seen, we've touched on a range of topics. And, that's great to have these variety of questions and topics to look at and ponder about. And of course, I would invite you to explore these things on your own. Everything I say is simply my perspective. Feel free to use that in a way that's helpful. So it's certainly been a lot of fun for me, every single AGP, including today. It's always fascinating to see what comes up, both during the meditation and in conversation. So I really appreciate each and every one of you for being here, for your heartfelt presence, participation, and truly wanting to engage with light, higher consciousness. There's, I think, a lot going on that we don't necessarily have to talk about that, but these are things happening within us, helping us. And so I really appreciate light itself, because that's really what makes things happen. And so I'm very grateful to light and all the great high representatives of light, and grateful to all of you for being here and trying this out. It's certainly not a typical personal growth program. It's very unusual in many ways. So it's been a lot of fun. So thank you all again. Boundless light and love to each and every one of you on your journey. And I certainly look forward to seeing you again at some point. Thank you.